Two girls were sitting on the floor in a large room that clearly looked like an outbuilding, and one of them addressed the other, calling her Lucielle. She ordered not to drink the tea that the nanny brings, but to pour it out. If she had to drink it anyway, the older girl told her to close her eyes and draw circles with her imagination. Counting to 1,000, the younger one asked why she should do that. The elder one replied that this was the way to do it because one should not show any emotions. She asked if Lucielle could do this. The younger girl hugged her sister tightly and said yes. The older girl said that her little sister loves Lucielle. Her fingers dug hard into the younger girl's shoulders, causing her to cry out that it hurt. Lucielle looked up, tears running down her face. A dark shadow hid her sister's face. Lucielle's jewel-like eyes widened in horror. These people, this frenzied crowd that screamed, wanting her dead, demanding her murder, with distorted faces, the expressions of which melted into a murky haze and bloody stains, they called her a fraud. That day, a girl in an old dress was kneeling on a platform in the square of a small town, and a crowd was raging near the platform, wanting her to die. The man who stood over the kneeling girl to make Lucielle listen to him, she is called a fraudster who created fake gemstones. The black-gloved hand grabbed the hilt of the sword, and the voice continued its accusation, mentioning that it was because of Lucielle that the Belstein family had fallen. And now the empire has fallen into the hands of this man, and all this happened because of the stones created by the fraudster. People shouted that she was a liar and a thief. They demanded that she be punished. The girl heard nothing but death wishes in this noise. Stones flew towards her. One hit her temple and cut her until she bled. She was on her knees, her hands tied behind her back, and blood was dripping from her face onto her dress. A cheat, he heard, a miserable cheat, and for this I sacrificed my life. Lucielle felt her sister's ghostly silhouette stand behind her, put her hands on her shoulders, and her sister's voice called her good, unfortunate sister. Sister, Lucielle thought to her, I'm so tired of this fight. The girl didn't think she could take any more. She was exhausted and wounded. Then, many years ago, that man came to her with a lit candle to dispel the darkness of the barn. He told her that Sister Lucielle had died. Lucielle was very little. She looked at the man, unable to believe what was said. She asked again if her sister was really dead. Yeah, said the man, clearly not feeling any regret. Lucielle was horrified to hear that her radiance was undoubtedly better than her sister's, so now it was her turn. You will become my personal precious slave, my crystal fairy, the man declared greedily. The crystal fairies were an ancient, rare race that was mentioned in the founding myth of the empire. They had eyes that sparkled like jewels. They also had the mystical ability to create gems from their own feelings, and Lucielle was the world's last crystal fairy. The girl's gift was first used by Duke Orbini, the man who reported her sister's death. He sorted through the jewelry created by Lucielle and exclaimed that he was rich. Then there was the Marquis of Kabila, who demanded more and more stones to hit the jackpot. And finally, there was the heir to the throne, the one who laughed as the magic filled him, the one who raised his sword over Lucielle on the dais where she knelt. Lucielle had to spend her entire life in slavery to them, creating stones. Her life was a true hell. Many innocent people died. And the girl understood that it would be better to run away, risking her life. If she had done so, then her sin would have been less, and the Belstein family would not have perished. But now the sharp edge of the blade was at Lucielle's throat. Lucielle asked the heir to the throne, "Do you really feel nothing at all in the face of death?" He smiled, only it was more of a grin, and he told her to try to create a stone out of pure horror. Lucielle looked up and looked at the man who held the blade to her. Then she turned away without saying a word. The crown prince said that it was extremely arrogant. He declared that he would fulfill Lucielle's last will. But in reality, she just wanted her sister and herself to live happily. She wanted to meet her love and live a normal life, and now she found herself on this platform, surrounded by the hatred of the crowd. Her hands were tied and she would soon lose her life as a sinner. I'm sorry, sister, she thought at last. She was asking for forgiveness for not being able to hide her emotions as she had promised. This sword of the heir to the throne became the weapon that ended the life of the last crystal fairy. Lucielle fell onto the wooden platform, covered in blood. Her last thought was that she would finally meet her sister. The heir to the throne looked at her and asked if she was needed at all. At that very moment, shouts were heard in the crowd. Someone was asking what was going on. Someone was just screaming incoherently because a rider on a black horse burst into the very thick of the crowd. The heir to the throne looked at the newly arrived character. It was a golden-haired youth in a blue uniform. Clouds of dust rose from under the hooves of his angry horse. The youth's black cloak fluttered in the wind. "Reynolds," said the man, stopping. "Reynold," he repeated in the confusion of feelings that killed him. A dark red whirlwind rose from his hand, raised above his head, and twisting into a spiral, rushed into the sky. The pentagram drawn in the air by the young man was increasingly emitting an unknown and dangerous force that knocked people off their feet. This stream dispersed the crowd of onlookers and now circled over the platform where the crown prince stood and Luciel lay in blood. The prince looked at the man who had arranged this. He took a few steps towards the edge of the platform. "Reynolds," said the golden-haired youth, "I have come to avenge my family." Ah, the prince was surprised when he managed to do so, and a black whirlwind burst from his outstretched hand. The golden-haired man grabbed the prince by the throat and, lifting him up with his arm outstretched, pressed him against the wall created by magic. The power he used caused the prince suffering. The young man watched this without trying to loosen his grip. The prince dropped his sword, begging for mercy. The blade, emitting a strange power, fell next to the motionless Luciel. She would like to apologize to this man who was now standing here. She would like to ask forgiveness for everything. Maybe it sounded like an excuse. If she had been given another chance, she would have lived for it. She promised to remember him, and this feeling turned into a shining light stone. This stone fell very close to her face. The radiance emanating from it enveloped the girl's figure, as if enclosing her in a blindingly glowing sphere. At that moment, Luciel opened her unusual eyes again. She woke up in the basement where she had once spent her entire childhood, and she herself became a child again. She couldn't believe that she wasn't dead, but from the reflection in the darkened and cracked mirror, her own face was looking at her, just many times younger. Luciel was scared to see this, but she guessed that she had returned to her own past. She lay there on the floor for a very long time. She didn't know how much time had passed since she had reincarnated, but she thought that if this were a dream, she would have woken up long ago. The nanny came and told her that her sister had died 3 days ago and that she had to accept it, that she had to stop behaving like this. She gave her a cup and demanded that the girl drink it. Luciel recalled how her sister told her not to drink the tea but to pour it out, and the girl promised to do so. Now she understood that probably they were forcing her to drink this drink for a reason, but in order to awaken her abilities and bright emotions, her sister was simply trying to protect her as best she could. Luciel realized that the stones weren't appearing, which meant that she might not have awakened yet. The girl tried to use her powers and found out that the amount of mana she now had was the same as it was in adulthood before her rebirth. It turned out that this really was another chance given to her by the gods. It was a chance to start everything from scratch. The first thing that needed to be done was to escape from this basement before the nanny returned. Luciel saw a tiny window right under the roof, through which a piece of blue sky could be seen. The girl froze carefully, looking around. Luckily, there was no one up there, or so it seemed to Luciel. Suddenly, she heard a voice. It was a guy talking to his sister. He was explaining that he himself would do some work, and his sister could rest, because it was hardly worth expecting that the girl would come up here. Luciel hid and nimbly rolled down the haystack. It wasn't the nanny. Luciel heard the voice saying that Lady Velati would scold her if she found out. So everything had to be kept a secret until Sally arrived, and everything would be fine. The guy sat down, leaning against a haystack, and began to read a fresh newspaper. Luciel cautiously peeked out from her hiding place and began to look over the boy's shoulder while he was engrossed in reading the news. The newspaper said that the largest auction in the empire would be held today at the Elantra Trading House, and it was expected that the exhibition would feature the works of the brilliant artist Marnosa, as well as various rare works of art and jewelry. Luciel remembered how Marquis Kabil was upset that an old man from the Belstein family bought a painting that the Marquis liked at auction. The girl thought about the Bellsteins. This family had always been shrouded in a veil of secrecy. These were people that even the royal family feared. Luciel thought that if it was the Bellsteins, they would easily suppress Count Orbino, so she had to go to that trading house and meet with one of the Bellsteins. Luciel came closer and called out the guy's name. His name was Tom. He didn't expect her to appear and almost jumped on the spot. The boy recognized Lucielle and asked how she managed to get out, but the girl put her finger to her lips and told him to listen carefully and not interrupt. "The pocket watch, the pipe, and this newspaper," said the girl. She declared that if Tom did not give them to her, she would tell the owner that the boy had stolen them. Tom became worried and asked if she thought anyone would believe her. Lucielle answered seriously that the owner was very suspicious and did not like it when subordinates touched his things. She asked what he thought would happen if they ordered a search of his room. Lucielle said that she wanted to pray for her sister. She ordered a carriage to be found that would take the girl to the temple. That was all she asked for. Soon, the girl was already sitting in a carriage that was supposed to help her find a safe place where she could wait until she came of age. The carriage rolled along a country road towards the auction that Lucielle had read about in the newspaper. The next lot was announced at the auction, the price of which was 30,000 tillings. Lucielle thought that she needed to meet one of the Bellsteins before Count Orbini discovered she was missing. The easiest way for a child of noble birth to join another family was marriage. Lucielle managed to get into the hall where the rich and noble people had gathered. The girl hid behind a stone vase and tried to figure out how she could find someone from the Bellstein family here. At that moment, she was noticed and grabbed by the collar. The guy in the uniform of this house asked how this little girl managed to sneak inside. He suspected that she got in here to steal something. Lucielle screamed that she was not a thief. She introduced herself as a servant of the Bellstein family. The young man threw her away and shouted that she didn't dare lie. He declared that he was still just a child and already a liar, but suddenly they were interrupted by a voice that told the young people to mind their own business. The man stood up from his table, one of those where the auction guests were sitting. Looking at the young men who were about to kick the girl, this man declared that the child was with him. It was a tall, elderly gentleman, His Grace Duke Gilliard von Bellstein. The young people bowed low before him and asked for forgiveness. Lucielle sat up and looked carefully at the man who had so unexpectedly come to her rescue. "At such moments one must say thank you," the Duke remarked, and Lucielle hastened to bow and thank him for his help. The Duke said that it was an extremely brave act on the part of the girl to pretend to be a servant of an aristocrat because it was a rather dangerous lie. Lucielle muttered sheepishly that she was very sorry. The Duke asked if she was alone there, and the girl hesitated because she did not know how to tell him everything she wanted. The Duke said that if she was alone it would be better for her to follow him, and he would make sure that she remained with him until the end of the auction. Lucielle happily agreed. There were a variety of treats on the table, including tea with milk and strawberry tart. The Duke warned the girl that the tea was hot. Lucielle looked at the riches in front of her with wide eyes. Duke Bellstein was drinking tea, and Lucielle held her cup with both hands and looked at the old gentleman. She also tried the drink, which had a very delicate and sweet taste, and also a soft foam. Lucielle put her cup down on the table. She thought it was all too delicious. The girl confessed to Duke Bellstein that she had never tasted anything so sweet before. She said that it felt like that gentle warmth when you fall asleep. Gilliard Bellstein burst out laughing and said that this comparison was very unusual, and then offered the girl to try the tart. Lucielle took a bite and a look of bliss appeared on her face. At this very time, Count Orbini discovered that his captive had disappeared. While Lucielle was enjoying the delicacies in the house she had left behind, a scandal was brewing. The Count hit the nanny who failed to keep an eye on the girl. He called everyone names, asking if it was really so difficult to keep an eye on the girl. He ordered that she be found immediately. He didn't know that Lucielle was in the hall, illuminated by a huge, luxurious, gilded chandelier. The girl whispered to Duke Bellstein which lots were worth betting on. She explained that her dreams always come true, and soon the price of the things she listed would skyrocket. Soon the Marquis of Kabyle would offer 500,000 tillings for this porcelain vase. The Marquis actually offered the stated price within a moment. Duke Bellstein thought. Lucielle looked at him with such sincere joy and promised that she could make him rich. After the auction, Duke Bellstein led the girl to his carriage, which was parked near the building where the auction was held. "Wow," Lucielle said, looking at the crew. Gilliard Bellstein glanced sideways at the girl. He said that thanks to her he acquired a magnificent work of art, and then asked where her house was. Lucielle replied that, to be honest, she had absolutely nowhere to go. This made Duke Bellstein think again. Soon he made a decision and ordered the girl to get into the carriage. She climbed inside and sat on a seat so high that her feet did not reach the floor, and the Duke asked her name. The girl did not answer, and the Duke asked if she was afraid of him. The girl was distracted from her thoughts and said that she did not feel anything like that. The Duke seemed sweet and warm to her. These words greatly surprised Gilliard. He burst out laughing and declared that it was the first time in his life that anyone had said anything like that to him. Luciel realized that for some reason she felt very calm around this man. She felt that she could even do what she had not dared to do. She even decided that she could show this man what was unusual in her eyes. She said that her name was Luciel of the Orbia house and asked to be taken to the head of the Belstein house because she had something to tell him. Gilliard looked at her with great surprise. That glow he saw in the girl's eyes was familiar to him. Gilliard said that for the first time he regretted handing over his title as head of the house, but he could take the girl to the current head. "Thank you, Grandpa Duke," Luciel cried in delight, and Gilliard burst out laughing. He told the coachman to move on, and Luciel thought she didn't understand why he was laughing like that. The carriage rolled along the forest road, leaving the city behind rather quickly. Luciel looked out the window with curiosity at the landscapes flying past him. She thought that what she was feeling now was called happiness. At last she was on her way to the Belsteins. Gilliard Belstein looked at this girl, Luciel of the Orbia house, and thought. The girl, tired from her impressions, fell asleep, and Gilliard thought that she was not at all like a member of the Count's family. It was unknown what her circumstances were, but it seemed that she was very eager to leave that house. Besides, this girl said that she sees the future in her dreams. Marquis Kabyle actually offered the exact amount she named. Gilliard thought that 100,000 tillings was an insignificant amount for the Belsteins, so he offered it as a joke, but judging by the Marquis's reaction, it really was something valuable. And she also had eyes like a fairy from legends. Gilliard saw clearly this radiance in the girl's gaze, reminiscent of the sparkle of precious stones. She was definitely not an ordinary child. Gilliard covered the girl with a soft blanket, thinking about the possibilities that were now opening up. He thought that perhaps this girl could even help his grandson open his heart to others. Gilliard's intuition never failed him, so taking her with him was a good decision. Luciel tossed and turned under the covers and muttered something in her sleep. She woke up at sunset and realized that someone had covered her with a blanket. She had heard rumors that the Belstein family was ruthless and cruel, but it seemed that this was not the case at all, and perhaps all those rumors were lies, Luciel thought with a smile. She looked at Gilliard and thought that the sensations she experienced from the care shown to her were as soft as milk foam. Luciel thought about the milk tea. She hoped that she would be able to try it again. The girl looked out the window in surprise. She noticed that it got dark too quickly. Gilliard Belstein explained that once the barrier is passed, the sun always sets quickly. He asked if the girl was scared and told her not to worry because he would be next to her. "Yes, Grandfather Duke," Luciel said. Gilliard said that from now on she could just call him Grandpa. Suddenly the carriage stopped so abruptly that Luciel almost fell off the bench. The coachman said that thorny vines were blocking the way. Gilliard sighed that it was already getting dark. Nothing could be done. The Duke told Luciel to wait a little. He saw the girl's excitement and asked if she was scared, and the girl admitted that she was. The two of them got out of the carriage. There was a dense forest around them. Gilliard took Luciel in his arms. He told her that she didn't need to be afraid. There were no monsters here. The girl thought it was very cold here. She looked at the thorny vines blocking the way and thought that they had finally reached the Duchy of Belstein. "Wow," Luciel exclaimed. They had to overcome a rather difficult obstacle. She was very surprised and said that these thorny thickets were moving. Gilliard thought he hadn't used magic here. He lowered the girl to the ground. He said it seemed like the thicket was clearing a path for Luciel. He asked if the girl wanted to try to approach, but said that she shouldn't force herself if she was too afraid. Luciel decided to try. She came very close to the intertwining vines. They actually made way for her. This made Luciel happy and she smiled. "Grandfather," she cried, and no longer afraid at all, she walked along the passage that had formed, and the thickets retreated from her path. Gilliard thought that long ago the owners of this forest were fairies, and a happily laughing Luciel seemed to be one of them. Having overcome the obstacle, they approached the Belstein residence. As they entered, a maid in a black dress bowed before them, welcoming the master back. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw the girl next to the Duke. She asked who the child was, and Gilliard replied that it was a guest who had come to meet the current head of the Belstein house. The maid crouched down to be at Lucielle's eye level and greeted her, introducing herself as Ava, the maid in charge of Duke Belstein's main estate. The girl gave her name, and Ava asked her to sit down in the guest room and wait. The Duke would soon come down. Suddenly, there were quick footsteps, and another person appeared in the hall. Gilliard, Ava, and Lucielle looked at the man who asked if their father had returned safely. It was a fair-haired man in a uniform decorated with gold trim. He quickly descended the wide staircase and asked where the child who had come to see him was. This man was Louis Vuitton von Belstein. Gilliard explained that this girl really wanted to meet the head of the Belstein family, so he brought her here. Louis Vuitton asked if Gilliard really thought that everyone could meet the head of the family just by wanting to. Lucielle said that it was an honor for her to meet Duke Belstein. She gave her name and explained that although she was an illegitimate child, she also had noble blood in her. Louis Vuitton looked at the girl very carefully. Lucielle said she came because she had to tell him something. She tried not to look the man in the face. He seemed creepy to her. Louis Vuitton ordered Eva to escort the guest to the office. He sat down at the table and began to write something on a piece of paper. It was strange for him to see his father sitting next to this girl on the sofa, talking to her, laughing. "What a strange sight," he said out loud. Gilliard said that from now on the Duke would have to see this often. Louis Vuitton got up from the table and moved to the sofa opposite Gilliard and Lucielle. Gilliard asked if he wasn't curious about how exactly he met this girl. Louis Vuitton stated that, moreover, he was very interested in what business she had with him. Said Lucielle. She did not know at all where to begin her explanation. Eva came up and brought dessert. Lucielle's eyes lit up with delight. It was a parfait in which she saw strawberries. The girl had heard of such a delicacy before, but had never tried it herself. Eva asked with a smile if the portion was too big, because the chef was so excited about the opportunity to make dessert that he might have overdone it. Gilliard asked, "How about listening to the young lady over a cup of tea?" and Louis Vuitton said yes. Lucielle ate the dessert with pleasure. It seemed to her as if creamy snowflakes were melting in her mouth. Louis Vuitton was surprised by the enthusiasm with which she ate, as if she had been hungry all day. For some reason, this girl reminded him of a rabbit. The Duke couldn't help but smile. He picked up his cup to hide his expression. He asked if Lady Orbia would like to get down to business at last. Lucielle realized that she had been too focused on eating and had kept the busy man waiting. "You can do it, Lucielle," she said before jumping up. She said that she had come to make the Duke a lucrative offer. She knew that the Duke had a son about her age, and she asked to be allowed to marry him so that she would be protected until she came of age. "An interesting proposition," the Duke said mockingly, looking at the girl. Lucielle knew that the Belstein family was considered untouchable in the empire, so it was unlikely that their offspring would seem like an enviable match to anyone, but she believed that things were not so hopeless. Lucielle said that she needed a period until she came of age. The engagement could be broken as soon as she became an adult. Louis Vuitton was willing to listen to the details of this proposal before making such a deal. He asked if the girl could offer him something in return so that he would not regret it. It was a serious decision. Lucielle said she could tell me where to find the magic stones. Louis Vuitton crossed his arms and stated that the Belstein family already had a place where they mined magic stones, so this information was useless. And besides, they had no need for material values. Louis Vuitton said with a boastful smile that the Belstein family's vault was overflowing. Lucielle thought sadly that if they didn't want material goods, then she had nothing to offer, and what should she do now, because her plan might not work? She could only do one thing, so she said that there was going to be a major landslide on Mount Lafayette soon, so it was necessary to protect nearby farmland and evacuate people. Louis Vuitton asked why she brought it up. Lucielle said she had a dream about the future. She suggested sending someone closer to the mountains to check if they heard any strange sounds. "You better believe her," Gilliard said firmly. He said that even their thorny vines retreated before her. Louis Vuitton asked in surprise if this was true. Gilliard nodded in agreement. Louis Vuitton suddenly created a glowing ball in his palm. The Duke spoke while looking into the orb and gave an urgent order to reconnaissance teams C and D. He ordered them to go to the area near Mount Lafayette and check the area for strange sounds. They answered him that the closer to the mountain, the more clearly the noises were heard. Something was collapsing near the path leading to the mountain. The message from the reconnaissance squad made Louis Vuitton's expression darken. He finished giving instructions on the magic ball and turned to Lucielle, wanting to clarify about her prophetic dream. He asked the girl what else she saw. Gilliard stopped his son, noticing that he was scaring the girl. Lucielle exclaimed as the black wall collapsed. "What?" both Belsteins asked again. Lucielle said she didn't remember all the details, but she could swear that it would be like this. She wanted to make sure the Belstein line didn't disappear. Soon the boy, sitting on the balcony, bathed in the sunset light, was reading the letter. Other opened envelopes lay on the table next to him. The boy read in amazement that the letter spoke of marriage. Judging by the handwriting and wording, it looked like what the boy's father had written. He was reporting that a bride had been chosen for him by marriage contract, a sweet girl from the family of Count Orbia, sweet and bright, like a fluffy white lump. The boy would soon meet her. This boy was Kaisef von Belstein, the eldest son of the Belstein family, and he considered what was written in the letter absurd, since the bride had been chosen without his knowledge. At the Belstein residence, 2 maids introduced themselves to Lucielle. Their names were Bessie and Rose. They were pleased to meet her and wanted to know more about the young lady. The girls looked after Lucielle. They dried her hair with a soft towel and picked out other clothes for her. The marriage was a luxury, and Duke Louis Vuitton came to see the result of the efforts of the maids. He looked at the girl, who was very far from being a true aristocrat. Lucielle wrapped herself in a towel and laughed joyfully, and the Duke thought that he should refuse her offer. Time passed. Lucielle lived in the Belstein estate. She sat by the window and admired the leaves that swirled in the wind. Lucielle spent hours in the library reading the necessary books. She learned that the gems she created contained not only magic, but also the power of the elements. The Crown Prince once realized this. He ordered the magician Erica to study these stones, and eventually they even created a magic sword. For the sake of her research, Lucielle had to continue creating gems every time she had the strength. In order to change her destiny now, Lucielle needed to ensure that the power of the gems belonged to her alone. The first thing she must do is learn to control her power and use it only at her own discretion. The books said that she should start by mastering the breathing of mana. Lucielle wanted to make the limitless power of gemstones her own, so she began studying them. She used exercises she read about in books. Streams of power swirled around the girl sitting in the chair. Lucielle concentrated on what she was trying to do, closing her eyes. Someone called out to her, calling her "Milady." She recognized that voice. It was a young man named Ellington, and he recalled that his lordship had introduced them to each other recently. Lucielle smiled widely and said hello. She thought she couldn't let him notice that she was training her mana control. Ellington noticed the books on the table next to the girl and asked if she was studying the history of the Duchy of Belstein. Lucielle explained that she realized that she knew little, so she decided to make up for lost time. Ellington was amazed at the complex books this little girl was reading. He said that he had read the history of the Belstein family when he first started working here. Lucielle asked what it said. Ellington said that it described the achievements of Mr. Gilliard and the current head of the family, His Grace Duke Louis, because Mr. Gilliard won more than 10 times in wars against monsters. It also told about the construction of the Belstein Pride, the Black Wall, how the Lord captured the Magic Tower, and how Mr. Louis expanded the territory of the duchy so often that he earned the nickname Lord Conqueror. There was a look of pure delight on Ellington's face as he told all this. He looked embarrassed and said that he had talked too much, but they were truly delightful. Lucielle was amazed. She doubted whether she could really be of any use to such people, but she was the only one who knew the future. She thought that if not her, then who could do this? Lucielle wondered what she needed to do to protect the Belstein family from the Crown Prince. She thought she might have to make friends with other influential figures in the royal family. She needed someone who could support this family and oppose the Crown Prince's plans. She thought of Her Majesty the Empress. Ellington noticed the girl's unusual thoughtfulness and asked if he had tired her with his story. Lucielle looked at him and held out something in her palm. It was a small candy in a striped wrapper. Ellington was surprised, but Lucielle said it was a bribe and offered to become friends. Ellington asked in surprise why he needed a bribe. He asked what she wanted. The girl said that he was smart and well-informed about everything, so she asked him to come closer. She whispered to him that she was asking him to be her ally. Luciel asked why Ellington came to the library. The young man explained that there was a serious problem in the village of Ibnak. The Valak Trading Company offers cheaper goods. Therefore, the products from the workshops were no longer in demand. Luciel asked what kind of goods they were. These were handmade glass items, and due to the dinner preparations there was no opportunity to mention them, but there was one very skilled glassmaker. Luciel thought about the man who created the glass cage she was trapped in her previous life when the crown prince captured her. She was going to tell this master about it. While thinking about this, the girl walked down the corridor while something flew past her. Luciel looked back and saw a boot that had fallen to the floor. "Move away," said the boy standing in front of Luciel. It was Leonie von Bellstein, the second son of the Bellstein family, and he asked if Luciel had heard him, since he had told her to move away. The girl bent down and picked up the boot. "Here, take it," she said, handing it to the boy. Leonie said he wouldn't accept it after Luciel touched it. He told her to pick it up herself. Luciel tossed the boot aside, leaned down and touched the boy's toe. She smiled and said that she thought he didn't need the sock anymore either. Leonie replied that his older brother would never marry Luciel, and he demanded that the girl return home. "I'm sorry, I can't," Luciel said sincerely. She explained that she had made a promise to the Duke, but she thought that the boy was simply jealous. "I won't accept you," the boy said gloomily. "I will never accept it," he repeated louder, and a large clot of living fire appeared on his palm. The flames weakened and diminished quite quickly. Judging by the uncertain flickering of this fire, it became clear that the boy simply did not control his powers. Luciel said that if the boy harmed her with magic, he would regret it. Leonie's eyes became very angry. He shouted that Luciel knew nothing. Suddenly he saw Luciel's hand coming very close. The girl handed Leonie a candy. She said that it was her favorite treat, but she wanted to give it away. The boy was very surprised. "Hey," he said. He wanted to know why the girl did that, and also how she knew his name. He asked if she still thought he was a child. And then he said that he doesn't eat candy at all. Luciel smiled and said that she would eat it herself then. She said that the candy was very sweet, as she thought. The strawberry candies prepared by the chef were the best, so she felt sorry that Leonie did not want to taste such a delicious thing. Leonie's face darkened and he told her to give him the candy. Luciel looked at him with interest and asked again what he wanted. Leonie turned away and said that if the girl insisted he would eat her, the candy was delicious. "Okay," Luciel said, handing him the candy again. But when the boy tried to take it, Luciel quickly pulled her hand away and clarified that she would only share the candy if he put his shoes on. Leonie obeyed and put on his boot. He was looking at the candy in the striped wrapper when he was called. They and Luciel heard a loud voice exclaiming that the head of the family was looking for the young master. Leonie said it was Sasha. The boy turned to Luciel and angrily declared that she was lucky, but next time he would definitely give her a thrashing. The boy started running. In the Duke's office, Ellington reported to Louis Vuitton that, according to the butler and Ava, the young lady's health had improved significantly. She had been seen in the library today, and her cheeks were quite plump. He also reported that the responses to both letters sent to Count Orbia and young Mr. Kaizef were delayed. The Duke said that then the letters should be sent again. The door opened and Leonie appeared on the threshold, accompanied by his nanny. Louis Vuitton said he had heard that the boy was often skipping classes. Now he wanted to know what on earth he was doing. The nanny tried to explain that the young gentleman was very upset, but the Duke wanted to hear Leonie's own answer. "Answer," Louis Vuitton said sternly. Nanny and Ellington stood and smiled, while in the depths of their hearts, each of them was almost screaming with anxiety, not knowing what to do but feeling the oppressive atmosphere. The Duke rose from the table and asked to speak with Leonie alone. When everyone had left, the Duke explained that overcoming feelings for the sake of deeds was also a kind of training. He said that he already does everything the boy asks, so he doesn't understand at all what he's unhappy with. Leonie asked when his brother and mother would return. The Duke recalled that they said they would return when the time came for it. Leonie said that he had already waited 10 nights, then 20, but they still hadn't come. The Duke asked sternly if this had anything to do with how Leonie behaved in class, and he ordered her to answer this question. Tears appeared in the boy's eyes. He replied that he did not have one, and burst into tears, saying through his tears that he was wrong. The Duke leaned towards him and said, "That's right. If Leonie doesn't use her powers recklessly, tries to speak and behave properly, and pays attention in class, Mom and Big Brother will be back soon." "Okay," said Leonie. The Duke replied that he was glad the boy understood everything. He said that Leonie should come to dinner tonight because Louis Vuitton wanted to introduce him to someone. The Duke said that if you think about it, she would become his older sister. Leonie was surprised by these words. Lucielle was dressed in a new dress. It was so fluffy and elegant, as if she was going to a ball. The girl entered the dining room and greeted Duke Louis Vuitton and Gilliard, whom she called grandfather. Gilliard was delighted to see her and said that she had become such a sweet little lady that she was hardly recognizable. Gilliard turned to Louis Vuitton and asked if he thought the same. "Thank you for the compliment," Lucielle replied happily, and they invited her to sit down at the table. There was a lot of fresh and tasty food on the table, and hot tea was poured into cups. "Wow," Lucielle marveled as she looked at this abundance. The Duke noted that the chef seemed to have put a lot of effort into preparing the dinner, so the girl could eat her fill. Lucielle glanced at the too many empty seats at this table, clearly intended for someone, and asked if the rest of the family would be coming. Gilliard explained that they were currently away for some reason and couldn't get together, but Leonie was supposed to come. Gilliard asked Louis Vuitton if he had invited Leonie, and the Duke replied that the boy would be a little late. Soon, children's footsteps were heard. Leonie also appeared in the dining room. "Here he is," said Louis Vuitton. Gilliard told the boy to come and sit next to Lucielle. The boy silently sat down on the empty chair. Lucielle greeted loudly. Leonie turned around and greeted her like an older sister, then wished her bon appetit. Lucielle smiled. The food was very tasty. She enjoyed every bite. Leonie sat nearby, gloomily picking at his plate with his fork. Gilliard said he thought the kids would become friends, and then asked how they could eat together more often in the future. Lucielle thought that this could be a great opportunity to get closer to Leonie, so she happily exclaimed that she was all for it. "What?" the boy asked excitedly. Gilliard explained that, judging by Lucielle's appetite, eating together would help Leonie overcome her picky eating habits. Louis Vuitton noticed that pickiness was one of the boy's bad habits. The Duke said that, as grandfather had advised, they would sit at the table with Lucielle for a while. Leonie's face clearly darkened upon hearing these words. Lucielle thought she heard how this boy would later become a villain involved in an illegal organization. If she stays close to him, maybe she can keep him on the right path. "Oh," cried Lucielle. She handed 2 pre-prepared cards and flowers to kind Grandpa Gilliard and Duke Louis Vuitton. Both read what was written with interest. Lucielle said these were thank you notes for them. Louis Vuitton thought about the people who boasted about letters from their children. The Duke said he remembered he had something for Lucielle. The girl looked at him with interest. "Boutique Florin," said Louis Vuitton. Lucielle asked again, trying to understand what the Duke meant. She would have to pay for all this later, but now she said she couldn't accept it. The Duke asked if the girl didn't need clothes. Lucielle thought that buying a whole boutique was too much for her alone. She said out loud that it was too expensive for her. Louis Vuitton was surprised by this objection. He said that since she was going to become part of the Belstein family, she should look appropriate. He was not going to do this for Lucielle herself. The girl understood that he was doing this for the family, in which case she could accept such a gift. The Duke asked if she could write, since she needed to sign over the rights to her own boutique. Lucielle noted that she didn't write very well. Gilliard looked at the Duke and thought that he really was his son. He had prepared so carefully for everything. He himself should not be left behind, and now he also needed to prepare an excellent gift. Night fell, and the maids put the girl to bed and wished her sweet dreams. Lucielle lay under a soft blanket. She felt very warm and comfortable. The food she ate today was so delicious, and she also received a boutique as a gift. And she also tried to train her mana a little and started an important topic with Ellington. Thinking of Ellington, Lucielle thought that tomorrow they should talk about the Glass Master. She decided that she would definitely do it and closed her eyes. In the morning, she was woken up by the same Bessie and Rose. Lucielle sat up in bed and said good morning, rubbing her eyes. The maids were happy that she had decided to dine with Mr. Leone from that day on, and besides, the dress had just arrived from Floren's boutique, so Lucielle could wear it. Rose had already prepared socks to match the dress. The words about socks touched Lucielle very much. These were her first personal socks. Being in the basement of Count Orbia's house, she always walked barefoot and dreamed of socks more than a dress. Rose asked what was wrong, but the girl explained that she just really liked the socks. The maids were very touched by this scene. They found the girl's delight over ordinary socks incredibly touching. At the table, Leone sat gloomily over an untouched plate, clutching a toy in his hands. Luciel thought that she didn't expect him to start eating right away, but she still asked him if he was going to do it. Leone turned away and said that if she thought he would start eating just because she was there, she was sorely mistaken. "That's how it is," the girl responded. "Well, then she thinks that she will be the only one of the two of them who will grow up." These words surprised Leone very much. Luciel said that since Leone was picky and ate poorly, he would definitely not grow tall, but she ate a lot of different foods, so she would grow as tall as the Duke. Leone imagined a future in which he would remain the same as he was now, and Luciel would grow taller. It sounded like some kind of nonsense. The boy thoughtfully scooped up a full spoonful of soup. He set about eating with determination, declaring that he would eat it all, that he could do it too, and therefore would grow as big as his dad. The nanny watched in surprise as the boy ate soup. Luciel thought with satisfaction that she had succeeded, while the nanny could not recover from the shock. Leone finished eating everything without being capricious anymore. He even tried to say that it was delicious, but he was not embarrassed and did not finish the sentence. The boy still said that the food was delicious. He noticed Luciel's joy and said that he ate this food not because of her words, but because he wanted it himself. The girl did not argue with him. Leone said he could eat that too, and Luciel and Nanny, who were watching him, thought he was magnificent. Luciel glanced at her watch last time Ellington came to the library at about 3 o'clock. Perhaps he would show up there at the same time today. Luciel jumped up from the table and ran quickly. She said on the run that it was very tasty, but now she had to leave. She shouted from the doorway that tomorrow she was also going to eat with Leone. The nanny noticed that the young lady apparently had some urgent business to attend to, and Leone sighed regretfully. Luciel was almost there. Ellington was approaching the door. She ran towards him with all the strength she had. To keep him from leaving, she called out to him as she ran. "Ellington, it's you," she cried. The young man turned around. He recognized her voice. He said that she shouldn't have run like that, but she just really wanted to tell everyone about the solution to the Ibnock village problem as soon as possible. Luciel asked him what he thought about giving Her Majesty a stunning piece of glass as a birthday present. The Empress was a person who set fashion throughout the entire state. If she likes the gift, the workshop may be flooded with orders, and this will solve the problem of the trading company's monopoly. Luciel said excitedly that this would be a glorious opportunity to revive Ibnock's economy. Yes, that was true, Ellington agreed. Surprised that he hadn't thought of it himself, the trading company run by Marquis Baluk was large and powerful, but if they did as the young lady suggested, they had a chance. Luciel told Ellington to find the glassmaker she had spoken of. "Okay," said Ellington. Luciel asked the young man to say that it was his idea because he would be listened to more than a child. Ellington wanted to object, but the girl exclaimed that she had forgotten to bring a bribe because she had not taken her purse. Ellington laughingly objected that he did not need anything. Luciel said with a smile that next time she would definitely bring something. A scandal raged in the estate of Count Orbia. The Count slammed his fist on the table. "Welsteins," he cried. "The letter I received was more like a warning than an offer. It looks like the person who wrote it knew exactly what he was doing." "Wait," he thought, "can't he just come and take Luciel back?" He laughed and threw the empty bottle on the floor, causing it to shatter into many pieces. The Count decided to drag the girl back and make her his precious slave again. At the Belstein residence, Ellington brought the Duke the documents that needed to be approved, and the Duke said he could go. Ellington remained standing opposite the Duke's table. The Duke asked if he had anything to say. Ellington said he would like to inspect Ibnock because the economy there is in decline, and he would like to personally assess the situation. The Duke folded his arms over his chest and told Ellington to state the real reason for his intentions. Ellington tried to evade the question, but the Duke asked him since when he was reluctant to speak out when given the opportunity. Ellington looked at Louis Vuitton in confusion. He explained that there was a way to revive the glass industry. The Duke asked if he was talking about destroying the Baluk Trading Company. "No," Ellington countered, and said there was a more peaceful approach. On the Empress's upcoming birthday, they could give her a piece from Ibnoch. The Duke asked if it could help revive the production, and Ellington replied that if the gift won the Empress's heart, orders would pour in from all over the empire. Louis Vuitton remarked that it was not bad, and then asked if it was Ellington's idea. The young man was confused and thought that he had been told to keep quiet about it. The Duke looked at him very gloomily. Ellington continued to smile. He mentally apologized to the young lady and admitted that it was actually Lady Lucielle's idea. Louis Vuitton looked at the young man skeptically. Ellington said that after listening to his concerns, Lucille personally suggested it. He had long noticed that this young lady was not at all like most children. The Duke agreed that this was certainly so. But more important, in the Duke's opinion, was the fact that Ellington had managed to get close to Lucielle. The young man replied that he did not think his lordship was in a position to ask about it. Louis Vuitton was surprised by these words, and Ellington replied that she was quite a formidable person. This conversation in the Duke's office was quite unusual. The Duke said he wanted to see what else the child could do, and he approved the inspection Ellington had requested. The young man found Lucielle in the library when he returned. He said that he came to give the girl something. She didn't even know what it could be. He brought her the chair of young Master Kaizef because he thought that Lucielle could find it very useful. Lucielle looked at the luxurious little chair in surprise. She tried to sit in his. It was the first time she had a chair. It was so comfortable. Moreover, when she sat in this chair, her feet reaching the floor, Ellington suggested moving the girl towards the table. He lifted the chair with Lucielle in it and moved it to the right place. Ellington laughed and said that when he was younger, his father used to do that all the time. Lucielle laughed too. Ellington placed the chair near the table and asked if she would like to ride again, but the girl said that she had had enough and thanked him. Ellington noticed a stack of books on the table. "Ah," Lucielle exclaimed. She explained that she became interested in magic after seeing Léonie use it. Ellington explained that all members of the Belstein family are born with magical powers, so it manifests itself from a young age. Ellington explained that for ordinary people this is quite difficult. He added that if the young lady tried hard, she would definitely learn. She should ask Mr. Gilliard for advice, because he was quite skilled in magic. Ellington was confident that Gilliard would not refuse to help her. The young man also said that he had received permission from his lordship to conduct an inspection, and he asked for some information about the said master so that it would be easier to find him. Lucielle was very happy. She said it was wonderful news. She was so glad that he allowed it. She asked to give her a minute to write everything down. Lucielle took a pen and wrote down the name and address. Ellington asked if he could offer Lady Lucielle a small bribe. He doubted that the girl would like it, but he still wanted to try. Lucielle asked what bribe he meant. Ellington led the girl into a beautiful, grassy garden, and she asked where they were. It was a playground built long ago by his lordship, the Duke of Gilliard, for the young gentleman, Ellington explained. He said it was wonderful that Lucielle loved to read, but children should play too. With a smile, Ellington asked if Lucielle herself thought so. The girl looked at the garden and the playground with a completely enchanted gaze. She was shocked by Ellington's words when he said that children should play. No adult had ever said anything like that to her before. Ellington asked Lucielle if he would like to take her on the swing. The girl sat down on the swing. Ellington told her to hold on tight and began to swing. Lucielle laughed. She was completely happy. It was a beautiful, clear day. Lucielle was having so much fun. She had never experienced anything like this before. Ellington continued to rock the swing, and Lucielle thought he was right. It was indeed wonderful to play, and she asked Ellington to push the swing again. "Ellington," she repeated as the swing stopped. For some reason, the young man didn't answer her. Lucielle heard footsteps and turned around. She would never forget the dark, gloomy shadow of this man. It was Count Orbia. Lucielle looked at him with horror. Count Orbia grabbed her by the shoulders and asked how she dared to run away from him. Lucielle could not answer anything because her tongue did not obey her. The Count pushed her and shouted at her to make stones. She fell to the ground, and the Count continued to shout that she must do more than her sister, cleaner and more. Lucielle lay on the ground, covering her head with her hands, muttering pleas for forgiveness. She was all alone in the midst of her endless horror. Suddenly, Lucielle opened her eyes in her own soft bed. The sun's rays fell through the wide window, illuminating the bedroom. Lucielle lay and looked at the ceiling. Then she sat up in bed and looked around. This episode with Duke Orbia, it was just a nightmare. That day, Duke Louis Vuitton asked Lucielle if she would like to attend the council meeting that day. This proposal surprised the girl extremely. The Duke explained that the vassals wanted to know more about her since she predicted the landslide. After the marriage, Lucielle would be staying here, so this was a good opportunity to get to know everyone. Since they wanted to know more about Lucielle, they were probably looking for information. She thought about what to tell her, but gave the Duke her consent. Then the Duke suggested taking the girl there. He asked if she didn't want it, but Lucielle said she didn't mind. The Duke came closer to the girl. He picked her up in his arms and said that they were now hurrying to the hall. Lucielle turned and, looking over the Duke's shoulder, said that she would be back soon. Bessie and Rose wished the little lady good luck. Louis Vuitton walked down a long corridor with the girl in his arms. Lucielle wondered what was going on. She smelled a very pleasant scent. The girl thought that she would probably feel the same way in a different situation. If only her own father were holding her in his arms. The people gathered for the council were already showing impatience. They did not know when the Duke was finally supposed to arrive. The door opened and Louis Vuitton walked in with a little girl in his arms. Everyone was surprised to see such a spectacle. Lucielle was seated in a special chair and looked around the gathering with curiosity. These people were vassals of the Belstein family. One of them said that he had heard that Lady Lucielle was very wise, but he never expected that she would be so small and young. This man introduced himself as Viscount Berger. The girl also said her name, bowing her head slightly. The people around her approvingly remarked that she was truly charming, as expected. They thought she was cute. They called her a darling. Finally, the very word that Lucielle was so afraid to hear was spoken. Someone called her a fairy. The girl's hand grabbed Louis Vuitton's sleeve, and he glanced at her. The girl was clearly very excited, or even scared. The Duke noticed that Lucielle was trembling. It seemed that she was afraid of these people. The Duke covered her hand with his. She realized that the Duke had noticed that she was trembling. When he took her hand, she immediately felt warm. Thanks to this, the trembling subsided, and for the first time she felt so calm. Enough of this empty chatter, said the Duke, and suggested getting down to business. It was decided to begin. Everyone took their seats at the long table. Lucielle was asked if she really had the gift of prophetic dreams, as many had heard about her, and because of this, good rumors began to spread about the girl. Berger noted that this is an impressive ability and could be a great asset to a family. Another person asked if it could be just a coincidence. He said that his wife also often sees dreams that come true. Once she had a bad dream, and then he fell hard and hit himself. Lucielle said that she didn't know much about such matters, but if it was for the Belstein family, she could prove her gift. For example, she asked if the battle armor that Count Gillen uses is too heavy. She was told that this was true, but no other armor could compare to it because its plates were made of steel. Lucielle clarified that no matter how strong the armor was, if it was hit with a hammer, it would still leave a dent. She asked how about making it out of mithril. Mithril was the name of a divine metal, light as a feather, and not inferior in strength to steel. People looked at Lucielle, not believing that the girl could know the place where to get it. Before Lucielle's reincarnation, Marquis Kabyle and the Crown Prince had joined forces in a tourism development project, and the discovery of a mithril vein had caused quite a stir in the empire for a time. Lucielle's information was very limited, but she could tell that in the cave with Lake Prendel, in her dream she saw a vein there, and since mithril is light and strong, armor made from it would be much better than the current one. Just think, the girl heard. The council members were surprised that she had thought it all out so carefully. They said that Lucielle was truly a diamond. A map appeared on the table if the vein was located near Lake Prandal. If you set off right now, the journey would take about 3 or 4 days. Louis Vuitton announced that Count Gillen would lead the mission to obtain mithril. Count Gillen thanked him for his trust. At this time, a man ran up to the castle walls entwined with thorny vines. This man laughed while calling someone a fool. Count Orbia told him to take only the child, a girl with silver hair and scarlet eyes that shine like precious stones. Now the man was happy that he would receive so much money just for bringing some brat to the count. He touched the wall with his hand, and at that moment a spark of energy ran through it. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck the man and he had fallen to the ground. He was lying in the grass when someone approached him. They were 2 figures in cloaks with hoods that completely hid their faces. These figures passed by the fallen thief and picked him up. Upon learning of this incident, the Duke inquired what kind of madman had attempted to penetrate the walls of their estate. He was informed that, judging by his clothes and the things he found, he was a mercenary from other lands. Probably someone hired him specifically to get over these walls. The guard commander said that this thief was currently being interrogated, so they would soon be able to find out the name of the employer. He wanted to know what to do with the prisoner after that. The Duke ordered to simply kill him immediately. The commander of the guard was surprised. He did not understand why the Duke was not going to find out the name of the customer. The Duke's eyes flashed scarlet, and he asked why he had to repeat his orders. The commander of the guard realized that the Duke must already know who it might be, so he bowed and said that he would take his leave. The Duke himself pronounced the name. He said that it was Count Orbia. Louis Vuitton thought that if they had asked him for a large sum for Luciel's marriage, then perhaps he would have turned a blind eye to it, but they dared to send someone to the castle so brazenly. The Duke understood that Luciel had definitely run away from that house, or rather from the Count. He wanted to know why she did it. Louis rubbed his forehead and then dropped his cigarette into the ashtray. He wanted to know if this was because he wanted to expand his territory again. Some might find this tiresome, he thought, and took another drag on his smoke. He imagined the blade of the sword covered in blood. He had a lot to remember while he smoked here alone. He glanced sideways at the stack of books and scrolls that lay on the table. This caused him to smile humorlessly. The Duke stretched out on the sofa and slept there until dawn. He thought he heard something from the door, but when he went out into the corridor, he did not notice anyone there at first. Then he saw Luciel standing in front of him. The girl also seemed surprised to meet him here. Louis Vuitton asked why she was standing at this door. Luciel didn't know what to answer. She just wanted to leave a note thanking him for meeting today. The Duke squatted down to look into her eyes and asked if she liked sweets. Luciel's eyes lit up with delight as soon as she heard about sweets. The Duke thought it reminded him of last time he invited the girl to come in. He had something for her. He stroked her head, a gesture that surprised Luciel. It didn't seem like the Duke was talking about documents like last time, but Louis Vuitton was quick to dispel her doubts and suggested that she come in calmly. It wasn't about documents. Indeed, Luciel thought as she stepped over the threshold. They and the Duke sat down on two small sofas in front of a laid table. The Duke asked Luciel how she was getting on here. The girl said that she really liked it. After all, she could go to the library here and read many books. There were people here who enjoyed talking to her. She also visited the playground and rode on the swings there. The words about the playground surprised the Duke, and the girl explained that Ellington took her to a playground in the forest and then even rode her on a swing. Louis Vuitton suggested that next time they go to the swing together. Luciel thought with delight about the proposal to go to this wonderful place together. She thought that this man remembered that she liked sweets, and now he was even offering to go on the swing together. She noticed the hyacinths in the vase on the table, and thought that perhaps they were also the same ones that she had given the Duke. But no, they must have just been put in recently, the girl said out loud, that these hyacinths were very beautiful. Louis Vuitton noted that she herself claimed that they symbolized the joy of the heart. Oh, said Luciel. Those were the words from that note. It turns out the Duke remembered them, and she thought he hadn't even read it. Louis Vuitton raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Luciel saw the piece of paper swirl in a stream of magical power. A piece of paper landed on the Duke's fingertip. He said that he still had the note and that he had preserved the flowers using magic. Luciel thought he was so kind to her, almost like her sister. But now Luciel asked a question. She wanted to know when she could meet Prince Kaizef. Louis Vuitton asked with a smile if she wanted to see him soon. Luciel said that the prince himself must give his consent to this marriage. The Duke asked her not to worry about it. She would meet him soon. Okay, Luciel said, smiling happily. Well, said the Duke, rising from his seat. He had told Luciel that he would give her something. Louis Vuitton told her to come up and choose the one she wanted from the many cookies. The Duke offered her to take whatever she liked, and Luciel froze in front of the many jars of sweets. Her eyes were completely dazzled. Luciel returned to her room, but even in bed she continued to hug the jar of sweets. She couldn't believe that he had prepared all this, especially for her. The shelf was full of various treats. Luciel was absolutely happy. Now she had another reason to visit the Duke more often. She wondered if she should pluck up the courage to visit him during the day, since he didn't seem to dislike her at all. Luciel listened to her own inner feelings. She realized that she felt much better. It was probably because she was constantly practicing the mana-breathing technique. Luciel tried to use her magical powers, and she succeeded. Energy flowed from her hands. She could even control it. Now she lay in bed, surrounded by the glow of the lights she had lit with her own power. Practicing on her own was all well and good, she thought, but it was better to do it with someone experienced. She thought about what would happen if Kaizef refused to marry her. Then she would probably have to leave Belstein, and then she would need all the strength she could muster to protect herself. Luciel decided to seek advice from Grandfather Gilliard, as Ellington had suggested. Suddenly she heard a sound and wondered who it could be. At this time, Duke Louis Vuitton approached the mirror and noticed what clothes he had been wearing all this time. Luciel walked towards the strange sound and asked who was there. "Luciel, it's me." She heard Gilliard's voice asking for permission to enter. The girl was glad that her grandfather came to her himself. She grabbed the comb, trying to tidy up her tangled hair, but she couldn't do anything, and Rose combed it so easily in the mornings. She finally accomplished the task and beamed. She opened the door. Gilliard came in and asked her to forgive him for disturbing her so late. Luciel asked what brought Grandpa here, and Gilliard said he wanted to show her something. The girl looked at him in surprise. It was a tree with multicolored pairs of socks hanging from its branches. The socks were also in a gift box that stood nearby. Multicolored lights shone and shimmered all around. Luciel looked at this miracle in complete delight. Gilliard said he heard she liked them, so he decorated the playroom with them. Luciel felt an indescribable gratitude towards the man. Gilliard told her to go and take a closer look. Luciel only hoped that this was not a dream. She rushed to hug the kind grandfather and exclaimed that she would wear these socks for the rest of her life. He asked if she liked the gift, and she replied that of course she did. Luciel thought that if her grandfather cared about her so much, then maybe she could ask him for what she needed so much. She looked at Gilliard and said that she dreamed of learning magic. Gilliard chuckled thoughtfully. He looked at the girl and saw her summoning a stream of power that surrounded her with a sparkling glow. Gilliard couldn't help but recognize that distinctive glow. Luciel explained that she knew little about magic, but was eager to learn it. Gilliard couldn't believe his eyes. He asked the girl how she managed to hide all this time the powerful magic that she possessed. He said that it was rare to see a child her age with such a volume of mana. The last time he saw something like this was with Kaizef. Luciel asked if he wanted to know how she controlled mana. Gilliard suggested that the girl try to absorb all this power into herself again. Luciel closed her eyes and tried to do as he said. The girl was surrounded by a sphere of blinding light, and thin rays radiated around it. Gilliard said it was just incredible. He said that even beginner mages have problems with mana control. He asked if the girl had studied magic before. Luciel replied that she never had, but she had had occasion to practice from books. She explained that she had taken a book on the mana-breathing technique from the castle library and then practiced it. Gilliard thought that even if you read the book, it would not be so easy to follow what was written. Perhaps this child was as strong in magic as all the young Belsteins. Then he thought that she could become even stronger. He imagined who she could become in the future. This fantasy was incredibly vivid. Gilliard became so infatuated with her that Luciel had to call out to him to bring him back to reality, asking if he would teach her magic. Gilliard hugged her and replied that he would be happy to teach her. Lessons could begin from tomorrow. Luciel smiled and thanked him. Gilliard told her that they had to go somewhere first. He extended his hand to the girl and told her to take a firm hold. Luciel did as he said. A bright glow emanated from their hands. Luciel closed her eyes and sighed. She felt something strange. It seemed to be the wind. The girl carefully opened one eye, and with her hand caught the leaves that the gust of wind threw into her face. Luciel's eyes widened to see silver tree leaves swirling in the magical light. Magic was everywhere. She and Gilliard stood in the forest in front of a tree filled with starlight, wonderful lights flashing here and there. Luciel thought it was incredibly beautiful. She threw her face back to this light and asked where they were. She didn't think it was a simple move. Gilliard said that she was absolutely right, and this garden was in another dimension, or rather, there were areas of intersection of dimensions in the Belstein estate. Luciel asked what kind of place this was. She guessed that it might be a demonic world. Gilliard explained that it was actually part of the demonic world before, and even earlier it was the home of fairies. Gilliard assured that the place was safe now. Thanks to the pure power of the moondew tree, no monsters can get here. Wow! Luciel breathed in admiration as she watched the leaves swirl and swirl. Gilliard said that today they would test her magical power, and to do this they needed to get closer to the tree. Luciel received this idea with delight. The girl's shoes walked confidently on the soft, thick green grass. Luciel walked and noticed how with every step she took, something extraordinary happened. From the grass, bathed in a magical light, a quiet, insistent sound seemed to be coming. Gilliard noticed how strange the girl was acting and asked what was wrong. Luciel replied that she just heard some kind of squeak. She asked if maybe she shouldn't step on the grass. Gilliard watched the girl very carefully. The grass actually made sounds with every step. Luciel felt like she was simply surrounded by these sounds. Gillarth asked the girl if she was okay. She replied that everything was fine, and the old Duke replied that it was strange that he could not hear anything. There used to be stories that the plants here could communicate with fairies. Gilliard heard such stories. She said that since everything was fine, they should go further. Together with Luciel, they came very close to the tree, and Gilliard thought of one extraordinary thing that suddenly seemed possible to him. The old Duke took the girl in his arms. He lifted her high up into the branches of a tree and told her to grab hold of one of them, then perhaps the tree would answer her. Luciel obediently reached out her hand to the silvery branches. The light that emanated from the branches and leaves became brighter in response to the girl's touch. Soon the whole clearing was in such a dazzling glow as if it were a clear day. "Luciel," said the old Duke. He said that this tree responded to moonlight, dew, and mana, but even he had never seen such a generous response. Never before had all the foliage shone so brightly with magic. Gilliard said that Luciel was truly special. The girl thought that this might be because she had fairy blood running through her. She wondered if the tree knew about this. The sparkle of precious stones became more visible in her eyes. Luciel asked if Gilliard had heard the silvery ringing coming from the tree. Gilliard replied that he had heard nothing. Although his hearing had never failed him before that evening, Luciel was surprised that her grandfather could not hear this sound. She grabbed onto one of the branches too tightly. She felt like the tree was responding to her, so she asked for forgiveness for this. Gilliard asked why the girl was talking to the tree, but the girl replied that she did nothing of the sort. She noticed that it was probably all just the wind. Gilliard thought that all these unusual things were to be expected from this child. He lowered the girl to the ground. The old Duke said that since he had decided to teach Luciel magic, he should probably tell Duke Louis about it too, and he asked if the girl would like to go with him and be present at this conversation. They stood in this luminous garden. The tree gradually diminished its fierce glow, and now one could see countless stars in the night sky. When the Duke heard Gilliard's words, he did not immediately believe that it was true. He said he suspected something was wrong. Luciel looked at the Belstein Dukes and firmly said that she also wanted to use magic, just like the head of the family and grandfather. The Duke said that if the girl wanted to learn magic so much, but he had several conditions, Luciel thought that he wanted to make a deal with her again. The Duke explained that the girl would first need to gain a lot of weight because she was too weak and would not be able to use magic without harming her body. Gilliard agreed that physical strength would definitely be needed to study magic. "Okay," Luciel replied, looking at the adults with wide-open eyes, in which one could read rapturous anticipation and hope. The second condition was somewhat unexpected, not only for Luciel, but also for the Duke himself, who was clearly embarrassed when expressing it. He asked not to call him so formally anymore, to choose something else instead of the word Duke. Luciel was very puzzled by this proposal. She wondered what she should call this man now. One of the options was Your Excellency, but Louis Vuitton thought it was worth composing and choosing something more informal and pleasant-sounding. Luciel thought even more, trying to figure out what word could sound nice. She looked at both Belsteins and thought that maybe the word father would be appropriate. Luciel's eyes lit up with genuine joy as she voiced her idea out loud. "That's better," replied the Duke, but it was clear that he doubted that it should sound that way. Then he said that simply Papa would be more appropriate. Luciel felt too much excitement when she said Papa for the first time in her life. Gilliard also beamed and laughed as he listened to this conversation. The Duke said it definitely sounded better than before. Later, Luciel was reading a book in her room in the company of her companion. The companion had already heard that Luciel had promised the old Duke that she would begin studying magic from today, and Luciel had confirmed this. Before the lessons began, she received a beautiful notebook as a gift, on which it was written that it was Luciel's strategy notebook for self-study. After this, the companion said that it was time to take her leave and wished the girl good night and sweet dreams. Luciel's plan consisted of many points. Written down in order, she was going to get closer to Leonie, learn magic, become stronger, create a strong bond with the Bellsteins, and some of this list has already begun to come to fruition. The girl noted that establishing connections was going smoothly so far. Now it was worth putting a question mark next to the point about finances. In order to achieve all of their goals, they also needed reliable security. Powerful allies were also needed, but there were already some very interesting ideas on this matter. No, she definitely shouldn't have rushed things so much. Luciel realized that she could only handle one task at a time. Of course, the ideal option would be to marry Kaisef and remain safe in the lands of Belstein until she comes of age. But even if this happens, sooner or later the time will come when Luciel will have to take matters into her own hands. She simply couldn't allow herself to go back to what had happened in her previous, horrible life. She clearly understood that now she needed to fully concentrate on mastering magic, because this ability was the most effective on the chosen path. When that very day of the first classes arrived, the sky above the Belstein estate was clear and sunny. A bright golden light penetrated through the window covered with twisted bars. On the table, there was a book on a stand, as well as 2 cups and 2 dishes, each containing a piece of pie. Luciel smiled and told Gilliard that he looked wonderful today. Gilliard was dressed in a white and gold uniform. He looked unusually solemn. He cleared his throat and said that he just thought that it was necessary to create a special atmosphere for their first lesson in the magical arts. To begin with, Gilliard promised to answer any questions Luciel wanted to ask. He asked if there was anything that interested her most, but the girl looked at him with huge eyes and ate the pie. She didn't even think about what exactly interested her, because in her past life she didn't understand anything about magic, and in this one she hadn't yet managed to understand what was preferable for her. Suddenly, she thought of a question that had been on her mind for some time, and looking at Gilliard, she began to ask why. She wanted to know the reasons why the Belstein family was so skilled in magic, more than all the other aristocratic families. Seeing the change in her grandfather's expression, Luciel thought that perhaps she shouldn't have asked so directly. She explained that she simply read in a book that every person has their own element. So she immediately wondered what element she herself might have. Gilliard stroked her head and said that there was no need to change the subject. He just didn't answer right away because he needed to think about how best to explain everything to her. Luciel admitted that she had, in fact, tried to change the subject and smooth over the awkwardness, as she thought it was an awkward question. Gilliard asked the girl if she knew why all the members of the Belstein family had red eyes. If you think about it, everyone in this family had eyes that were almost blood red. They felt like they had great power, and such eyes have long been considered a symbol of the demonic race. This was because Gilliard's father had mixed demonic blood. Demons have always been much stronger than humans in magic. Moreover, the Duchy of Belstein once served as an entrance to the demonic world. At present, the passage was sealed, but the spatial rift remained open. Gilliard explained that around him were places such as the garden where the moondew tree was located, as well as others related to the territories of the demon world. Luciel enthusiastically reported that the more details she learned about the Belstein family, the more interesting it became to her. Gilliard asked if this knowledge now made her afraid, but Luciel wasn't scared at all. Even though these people had demonic blood, it didn't make them any worse in her eyes. After all, everyone in the Duchy of Belstein was so kind and generous, and Luciel felt most comfortable with her grandfather, who was very happy when he heard this from her. Gilliard asked Luciel what she thought about starting their lesson now, and the girl responded with excitement because it sounded great. The time of classes flew by completely unnoticed, and later, when Luciel was building a house of blocks with Leonie, she told him that today she studied magic with her grandfather for the first time, which surprised the boy. He snorted and said he wasn't jealous at all, and Luciel said that learning in person was much more fun than doing it on her own from books. Leonie asked how studying could be fun, which in turn surprised Luciel, who didn't understand how it could be the other way around. Suddenly, something happening outside the window caught Leonie's attention. Luciel and Leonie walked to the wide window to see what was going on. They saw some kind of carriage arrive in the courtyard, and a girl with a large suitcase came out of it. The girl was met by maids, which clearly meant that the guest had come by invitation, and her arrival was expected in advance. This girl came specifically to Leonie and Luciel. Her name was Cyclane Renit. She was very glad to meet him, because from that moment on she would be the one taking care of their health. The children bowed and politely introduced themselves to their new acquaintance. Looking at Cyclane Renit's beaming smile, Luciel realized that she had met her before, even though she couldn't yet remember exactly when and where it was. The girl noted that young Mr. Leonie was 5 years old and young Mrs. Luciel was 9. To begin with, she suggested measuring their height. She had with her a special toy, a wooden giraffe with a measuring scale. Leonie was absolutely delighted. He clung to the giraffe, hugging him by his wooden neck and not wanting to let him go. Leonie was absolutely happy. Giraffe, giraffe, he kept repeating. Cyclane Renit told the young gentleman that this giraffe was not meant to be ridden at all, so he should let go of the toy and stand next to it while she measured the boy's height. Leonie got angry and said he wanted to ride a giraffe. Cyclane Renith couldn't get him to come down, so Luciel came closer and said that she thought she was much taller than Leonie. The boy angrily shouted that this couldn't be. He was taller than Luciel. She asked incredulously if this was true. The girls suggested measuring their heights and seeing which of them was taller, and then Leonie finally agreed. As a result, the height of the young gentleman turned out to be 103 and the young lady 115. Leonie was unhappy about being shorter, but Luciel explained that since she was older, it couldn't be otherwise. The girl patted Leonie on the cheeks and told him that he shouldn't worry because he would soon grow up and become taller. Yes, Leonie said. He was still a little angry about everything that was happening. Renit said that since the children had worked so hard today, she was going to give this giraffe to young Mr. Leonie. Then she called Luciel aside for a moment. She wanted to thank her for her help. Leonie was very happy with the gift, and Renit said that she had something for both of them. It was a coconut sprout syrup that would help both children grow big, and it was to be taken 1 drop at a time before bed. These words also seemed incredibly familiar to Luciel. Coconut sprouts, something about herbal medicines. She had clearly heard this in her past life. At that moment, she actually remembered that woman. Renit was an apothecary in the Crown Prince's retinue. She came to Luciel in her place of confinement. In the past, Luciel passed out from dehydration and was given an herbal medicine for Cyclane Renitis. It helped her instantly. She recovered immediately. Cyclane Renit was the Crown Prince's obedient puppet. In the end, she suffered a tragic fate, like everyone else who was careless enough to get too close to that man. If Luciel gets closer to Cyclane Renith now, perhaps the apothecary will be able to help her in the future, for example, by telling her about the benefits of various herbs. Luciel was genuinely happy about the gift and thought about how she could get closer to Renit and not allow anything terrible to happen. In her dream, Luciel saw delicate pink petals flying in a clear azure sky. Someone was calling her, and she seemed to find herself in the core of a huge flower. This voice was so familiar to Luciel, but she didn't want to open her eyes. And yet, when she realized that it was her sister's voice, her eyes opened wide. Luciel looked up. She was lying on her sister's lap, flower petals swirling above them. "Sister!" Luciel cried. She couldn't believe it was really her. The sister smiled. She said that it was really her, and she was glad that everything was okay with Luciel. Luciel was speechless. She could only look at her sister with wide eyes. It was really her, not another nightmare like so many times before, and Luciel rushed to hug her. The sister asked if it was true that Luciel had recently heard the voices of plants. Yes, Luciel confirmed. It was true. She had heard sounds in the Moondew Tree garden. The sister explained that this happened because the place was filled with fairy energy, and the fairy world was intertwined with the demon world. At the beginning of the world, these two races were close. Both were children of the gods. Yes, the sister said, they were like family. They have always been loved by both the world and fate. Now Luciel will be able to live a new life, and her sister promised to look after her. She called her her dear sister and released her embrace. Luciel cried and asked her sister to look after her more carefully because she would become the happiest in the world. When she woke up, she found herself lying on a small sofa with her head on Louis Vuitton's lap. Tears rolled down the girl's face, still deeply impressed by the dream she had seen. "Oh," she said, sitting up. She tried to figure out when she had fallen asleep. The Duke guessed that the girl must have been very tired from studying magic with his father. Luciel rubbed her eyes and said that she had fun, but she couldn't use magic on her own yet. The Duke looked at her with interest. Luciel said that her grandfather explained to her that her father had water and ice magic powers. Louis Vuitton replied that the girl would soon discover her own magic, and he was really looking forward to it. He said that they needed to go somewhere today. Luciel was surprised. She didn't know where she needed to go. Louis Vuitton explained that they would be going to the Royal Academy. At this time, Kaizef received a letter from home, which said that he was about to meet his fiancée. He stood in the hall of the academy. Many people looked at him, gossiped behind his back. Kaizef thought that, judging by what was written in the letter, this meeting was supposed to take place today. The carriage with the coat of arms of the Duchy of Belstein stopped on a lawn among flowers. "So," said Louis Vuitton, looking out the window. He said that they were almost there. Now they would first have a snack of what they had taken with them, and on the way back they could stop and eat at a restaurant. Luciel, as usual, was very happy with the idea of having a snack right now. Louis Vuitton raised his hand, and a small magical tornado began to spin above his palm. He managed to get a lot of delicious food, and Luciel clapped her hands at the sight of such magic. The girl began to eat with delight. She still felt an unprecedented pleasure from the fact that she could eat all these delicious things every day. She ate green grapes, soup, cream puffs, apple juice, and 2 sandwiches, and there were 3 sandwiches in total. Luciel sensed something unexpected in the dessert and speared a cherry with her fork. She showed a fork with a berry to Louis Vuitton. She said that someone had put a sweetening spell on the cherries. Louis Vuitton tasted the berry and asked if it was true. Luciel said it was very similar. He looked at the girl carefully. "Oh," said Luciel, noticing a large, bright stain on the hem of her dress. "When did she get so dirty?" And Louis Vuitton said that she seemed to really like the food. The Duke suggested taking the opportunity to visit Florin's boutique to change the girl into something new. It was right in front of the boutique that their luxurious carriage stopped. In the boutique, they noticed the coat of arms on the carriage, and a woman in a luxurious, fluffy dress came out to greet Duke Belstein with all the cordiality. Inside the store, there were many mannequins with clothes. "Wow!" Luciel breathed out in admiration. This store was so beautiful. The Duke said that all of this belonged to Luciel, so she could choose whatever she liked. The employees looked at this little girl in surprise. They were curious who she was, whether Duke Belstein really had a daughter. Someone was about to make tea for the guests, but Luciel stood there in indecision because there was so much here that her eyes were running wild. She took a few steps and stopped again because in front of her was the most beautiful dress in the world, with lots of frills and bows, soft blue. Luciel thought that if she wore it to meet Kaizef, she could impress him. Perhaps Kaizef will find her beautiful and agree to marry her. Luciel didn't notice that the girl with red hair was watching her. The girl came closer, roughly pushing Luciel out of her way. Luciel asked her what she was doing. The girl turned around and said that it was unlikely that this dress would suit Luciel. Luciel was surprised by these words, but she recognized this girl. She was the youngest daughter of the Marquis of Kabyle. In the past, Penelope von Kabyle came to Luciel's prison with her father. Luciel remembered how she looked at her through the bars. At their first meeting, Penelope asked her father if this was the same girl. Luciel sat in the corner of the cell, exhausted, a living precious vein. In those distant times, every stone was created according to Penelope's whim. Penelope often said that she was already tired of rubies and that she was fed up with sapphires, always the same thing, and this obsidian only caused horror. "Hey," Penelope said and demanded to create some other stone. She sometimes pretended to be kind in order to get something. Now, in this reality, Penelope demanded that Madame Marianne take off for her this dress that Luciel liked so much. Luciel looked at what was happening with bewilderment. She was used to the fact that she had to be careful and give up what she wanted to have to others, but now she did not expect such a situation. Marianne greeted Lady Kabyle and said that the dress was being looked at by a client who had arrived earlier. She explained that she should ask the first client first, which caused indignation in Penelope, who was used to getting everything she wanted. Luciel said that everything was fine and she could look for something else. Penelope looked at this unfamiliar girl in a dirty dress. There was anger in her eyes. Finally, she said with a smile that it was good that Luciel knew her place. Luciel bowed her head, forcing herself to endure her anger. Then she forced herself to look straight at the offender. A completely different thought suddenly came into her head. She was now a member of the Belstein family and had to carry herself with dignity. She was determined that she must act like a true member of the Bellstein family, which was considered villainous. She no longer had to fear anyone. At this time, Duke Louis Vuitton was sitting on a small sofa and leafing through a catalogue, surrounded by some ladies. He suddenly glanced at Lucielle, and she realized that this girl could not do anything to her anymore. Lucielle said loudly that when she was about to choose a dress, Penelope ran up to her and roughly pushed her away. And then she even had the nerve to say that such a dress would not suit Lucielle. Upon hearing these words, Penelope became indignant, declaring that she had never said anything like that. Penelope said it was all a lie. She came up and chose this dress first. Lucielle asked where Penelope's manners were, causing another outburst of her anger. Penelope shouted angrily and loudly that Lucielle should know her place. Penelope raised her hand and summoned magical power. "Enough!" said the voice of Duke Bellstein, who had been watching the children's quarrel for some time. Penelope looked up at the speaker in surprise. Louis Vuitton approached the girls and said that young Lady Kabyle had crossed the line. Penelope immediately changed her behavior. She stopped attacking and pretended to be scared. She began to sob bitterly and demonstratively. She rushed to a woman, a red-haired woman like her. This woman said that she was terribly sorry. Her daughter was young and capricious. Penelope put her arms around her mother and told her that she had to be on her side. Louis Vuitton told the Marquise Kabyle that he hoped her daughter would receive a proper lesson in etiquette. The Duke introduced Lucielle as his future daughter-in-law. He said that one day she would become the Duchess of Bellstein. Everyone around was amazed by the words that were spoken. The Marquise Kabyle told Penelope to apologize to the Duke at once, but the girl did not understand why she should do this. She just didn't want to do it, even though her mother tried to force her. Still, she had to turn to Lucielle and say that she was sorry. Louis Vuitton insisted that she apologize to his daughter-in-law. "I'm sorry," Penelope muttered, not feeling any sincere remorse. Lucielle told her not to do that again. Penelope began to sob inconsolably again. Louis Vuitton looked at Lucielle, while Lucielle looked at the Marquise and her daughter in surprise. Penelope sobbed bitterly, hugging her mother. The Duke asked Lucielle if everything was okay with her. The girl replied that everything was fine. Louis Vuitton stroked her head affectionately. He explained that she should not hold back if she encountered injustice, because she did not have to be a good, obedient girl. It was perfectly normal to think about herself and her own interests. Louis Vuitton said that from now on, Lucille must respect herself and live with dignity, because that is the way of the Bellsteins. Lucielle looked at him. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Respecting herself and living with dignity was exactly what Lucielle intended to do next. Marianne offered to help Lucielle try on a dress, and to do this, the girl had to follow her. "Oh," Lucielle suddenly said. She asked loudly if her dad knew about this. She said that she wanted to become a professional skier, but ended up falling off. The Duke looked at the girl thoughtfully. Then he laughed, enjoying her joke. He said he thought his daughter-in-law had a good sense of humor. At this time at the academy, Kaizef stood in front of his locker, to which a note was attached. He looked closely at this piece of paper. Then Kaizef tore off this leaf. Maximus again, he heard the voice as he burned the note with magic. A black whirlwind swirled around Kaizef, from which a question sounded. The whirlwind wondered if Kaizef wanted him to deal with them. Kaizef didn't answer. He stood there deep in thought. Behind his back, many girls, watching him with admiration, made admiring exclamations. They were all terribly interested in Kaizef. A hand from the darkness touched Kaizef's shoulder, and a voice said that these annoying little people were everywhere. "Am I right?" asked the boy who appeared from the dark whirlwind, wrapping his arms around Kaizef's shoulders, except for whom no one noticed this creature. The creature circled above Kaizef. In the clouds of darkness, it was a boy about the same age as Kaizef. Even his clothes looked like the uniform for the academy students. The girls who were fans of Kaizef followed him everywhere. One of the girls came closer and said that the director was looking for him. Kaizef walked down the corridor of the academy, and whispers sounded around him. Girls said that he was cool, worried that they weren't answering them. The ghost watched this very skeptically. Kaizef felt very alone in all this. He remembered well that day when he stood over the coffin. It was then that he first met this creature, his ghost. He noticed these clouds of darkness at the side of the grave, and heard a voice that asked him if he could see what he should not. Later, already indoors, he stood above a magical tornado that could have arisen anywhere. Kaizef was not at all frightened by what was happening. The creature from the darkness then took on human form only partially. This ghost said that Kaizef is quite cute. He promised that they would see each other later. In the director's office, the Duke and Luciel were sitting on the visitor's sofa. The director asked them to wait a little. Young Mr. Kaizef would be here soon. The director remarked that he did not know that there was a young lady in the Belstein family. He asked how about sending her to study at the academy a little later. Luciel countered that for now she was quite happy with her lessons with her grandfather. Kaizef entered the door. The boy looked sad and confused. "Ah, here you are," said the director, rising to meet him. Luciel, seeing Kaizef, also became noticeably sad. The director said that he would leave the Belstein family alone, and Kaizef sadly thought that his father had really brought to him the one who was supposed to become his bride. When the director left, Kaizef said that he was sure that his father had received the letter with his answer. Louis Vuitton did not argue, but stated that he thought that before making a decision, it would be better for his son to meet Luciel in person. Louis Vuitton said that even if it was just a marriage of convenience, Kaizef should at least know his bride. He asked Luciel to introduce herself, since Kaizef was the groom she had chosen for herself. Luciel looked up at the boy standing in front of her with a worried expression. Louis Vuitton noted that this was their first personal meeting. Kaizef silently glanced sideways at his father. He didn't like what was happening here at all. This girl in the frilly dress was so little. It turns out that Count Orbia forced her into marriage at too young an age. Kaizef bowed ceremoniously. Luciel rose from the sofa and curtsied, spreading her wide, frilly skirts. Kaizef looked at this very smart girl in great bewilderment. Luciel guessed that this sudden talk of marriage had taken him by surprise. Kaizef bowed slightly and thanked her for her understanding. He explained that he had no intention of marrying the young lady. Luciel became quite unhappy. She didn't expect him to refuse without even hearing the conditions. She said it was a bit rude of him. Kaizef replied that even if he listened to everything she said, his decision would not change. Louis Vuitton intervened and noted that he was very sorry, but he could not force even his own son into marriage. Luciel sadly admitted that he was absolutely right. The Duke looked at the children and thought that maybe it was for the best, because it wouldn't be so bad if they grew up on the estate just as brother and sister. Then Louis Vuitton would simply have a daughter as well. He also stood up and said that he would go away for a short while to talk with the director, and the children could wait here for a little while together. Kaizef and Luciel looked after him. Kaizef's face did not express any enthusiasm. Luciel thought that she didn't want things to end like this, so she had to try talking to him again. She resolutely placed her foot in a fashionable high-heeled shoe on a stack of books. She had to make Kaizef stop ignoring her. The boy asked in surprise what the young lady was planning. Luciel replied that since they were alone, maybe they could talk casually. "As you wish," said Kaizef, for whom none of this mattered at all. "Okay," Luciel said, looking very determined and a little angry as she gathered all her courage for this important conversation. Luciel said she knew why she was rejected now. She guesses that she is not very beautiful and probably does not have what Kaizef would like to see in the one he will one day marry and spend his life with. But she really didn't want to leave the Duchy of Belstein. Kaizef said that it was not at all about what she had just imagined. He explained that she was not unpleasant to him. Luciel asked what he meant when he said that. Kaizef explained that they had only met today, so there was no reason for him to dislike her. He just didn't want to marry anyone at all. Luciel was glad, because if he didn't hate her, then maybe he would agree to marry her and stay married to her only until they both grew up. Kaizef was surprised by the girl's unusual proposal. Luciel offered him a marriage of convenience followed by divorce. That was her condition. Kaizef asked if she intended to make this marriage last only 8 years. Luciel confirmed this. Kaizef thought deeply about everything he had just heard. He leaned closer to the little girl to look into her eyes. Kaizef asked why she was so fixated on marriage, since she was still so little. Luciel countered that she was not small at all. Kaizef scratched the back of his head and objected that the girl was too young for marriage. He asked what about her parents. Luciel hesitated. She said that she left home because her father was not as worthy a man as Duke Belstein. The girl explained that this is why she needed a place where she could safely wait until she came of age. Kaizef found it very strange to hear something like this. He already understood that the father of this little girl was an unworthy person, but who, if not a parent, should protect their child. He asked if this was the reason Luciel wanted to get married so much. Yes, the girl answered. For her, it was the only way to protect herself. She looked up at her interlocutor and asked him to agree, because if they got married, other ladies would stop bothering him. Lucielle promised to try her best not to disturb Kaizef in the estate. The girl carefully touched his sleeve. Kaizef looked at her thoughtfully and a little guiltily. He had a lot to think about during Lucielle's agitated monologue. The girl looked at him quite pitifully and asked him to marry her just for show. Kaizef also began to look completely unhappy. He saw a thin stream of smoke next to him. Kaizef asked Lucielle to wait here for 1 minute. The girl didn't expect this. She hadn't even finished speaking yet. Kaizef said he needed to think about all this for a bit, so he headed for the door. Lucielle could only watch sadly as he left. Okay, she said after him. She was left in this office completely alone. The girl sat down on the sofa and asked herself if she had been pushing him too hard. Proposing turned out to be more difficult than she had previously thought. She had been waiting for 30 minutes and realized that it seemed she had been refused after all. Lucielle picked up her fluffy skirts and went to look for Kaizef to urgently end this conversation. At this time, Kaizef stood on a high balcony and looked at the corridor of the academy. He thought about everything he learned. Could he really marry this very little girl? He heard her calling him, but he did not reveal his presence, and Lucielle passed by right under the balcony. Kaizef chose to head in the other direction. Lucielle walked further down the corridor, calling out to Kaizef from time to time. Lucielle walked through the crowd of students hurrying to class. One of them rudely pushed her, simply not noticing. This man did not let her fall and asked for forgiveness for not noticing her right away. He asked if she was okay. The other students surrounded her, saying that Lucielle was very cute, trying to guess if she was an underclassman, but she wasn't wearing the academy uniform. Perhaps this smart girl was a new student, so she was asked where her parents were, and Lucielle answered that she was looking for someone, and then she named Kaizef von Bellstein. This made the students even more interested. Someone said that he seemed to have seen him recently. Another suggested that Kaizef was her brother. Lucielle wanted to object and tell these people that she and Kaizef were engaged. She was not allowed to do this. Her mouth was cleverly covered with a hand. It was Kaizef, and he loudly announced that this girl was his cousin. This scene in the academy corridor attracted a lot of attention. Among those who wanted to take a closer look were 3 students who were smiling clearly unkindly. "Hey, Kaizef!" one of them shouted. He wanted to know if he had received his note. Kaizef glanced anxiously in their direction. He squeezed Lucielle's hand tightly. He tried to take the girl away from his ill-wishers, one of whom shouted after Kaizef that he was a demon. It was necessary to leave here, because there were too many extra eyes here. Kaizef started to run, dragging Lucielle along with him. He held her hand so tightly that she couldn't have freed herself even if she had wanted to. "Slow down," Kaizef heard the girl's pleading voice. He stopped and turned to Lucielle to apologize for the way he treated her, but the girl smiled and said that she was fine, she was okay. Kaizef asked if she wanted to take a little walk around the academy. Lucielle agreed. They stood near the stairs. Everything around was flooded with sunlight. Lucielle noticed flowers that she had never seen before. Kaizef stood nearby and watched the girl. She approached the flowers with delight, bent low towards them, and even sat down right on the stone floor slabs in front of some of them. He asked her how things were in Bellstein now. He meant whether the girl was happy there, and she replied that she was very happy there. Kaizef was surprised to hear that everyone was so kind and treated her so well, as if it was all a dream. He was especially surprised that Lucielle said that Grandfather Gilliart, the Duke, was all very kind to her. "I see," Kaizef said with a strange feeling. Then, he said to this girl in a fancy dress, "Let's get married." She didn't immediately believe what she heard and asked again if he really meant it. They were still standing together in the light-filled inner garden of the academy. 3 of Kaizef's enemies discovered them there. Kaizef, one of these students, called out to him angrily. "Let's get married," Kaizef said to this little girl. She looked at him with wide-open eyes and asked what he said. "True," Lucielle asked again, and reminded that she had not even named all of her conditions, and Kaizef replied that he was ready to do this, but only on paper. Kaizef replied that he had decided to protect Lucielle, so she didn't have to do anything for him. 8 years later, when Lucielle comes of age, their paths will diverge forever. He asked her not to expect more, as she wanted it would just be a marriage of convenience. "Okay," Lucielle replied, smiling. She assured him that she would be quiet, would not disturb Kaizef, and would leave when the time came. "Okay," Kaizef told her, deciding to go through with the deal. "Wonderful." the girl thought, and he extended his hand to her and suggested that they go back. Luciel thought that when she grew up and became stronger, she would be able to handle the defense herself. She placed her hand in Kaizef's palm, and they headed towards the office. "Hey, you devil's spawn," came after them, and Kaizef turned around. One of the students mockingly asked Kaizef if he was thinking of playing family. Luciel also turned around and saw the three students. She remembered again how badly she had been treated in her past life. She was completely helpless against her offenders. Now she stood before Kaizef and was one of the Belstein family. She carefully took her hand from the boy. "Luciel," he said warningly. He explained that she should, on the contrary, hold his hand tighter because now they would have to go a little faster. Kaizef really did quicken his pace so much that now the girl could barely keep up with him. The evil gaze of these three boys followed them. Someone from the group threw a small pebble. "Kaizef," Luciel cried out as the pebble hit her straight. Kaizef hurried to cover the girl with himself and asked her offender what he was doing. But the offenders were not going to stop the one who started it all. Maximus von Kabel was already swinging for the next throw. Kaizef created a magical tornado over his palm and repeated his question. He wanted to know what Maximus was doing. Luciel realized that Kaizef had summoned magic without any spells or magic circles, and very quickly, Maximus declared that he was just fooling around, and his companions began to snort and laugh. "What are you doing suddenly?" Maximus asked. Suddenly, they noticed that something was happening that they did not expect. Kaizef finished creating his magic projectile. He launched this cloud of energy at his ill-wishers. The shell exploded right under their feet. Maximus fell to the ground with a scream, unable to stay on his feet. It was an air vortex that Kaizef launched with ease while Luciel hid behind his back. "Kaizef!" Maximus growled angrily, rising from the floor. He asked if Kaizef really thought he was afraid of such pathetic magic. Maximus's hand reached for the hilt of the magic sword. Maximus shouted that he would put an end to the terrible witchcraft of the Belsteins. Kaizef asked Luciel to hide for a while. The girl wanted to know what they were going to do. The boy looked at her, and Luciel replied that she understood. Maximus asked if his opponent thought he would allow himself to be mocked. Kaizef created another magic projectile and was ready for battle. He swung and threw it at his opponent. Maximus wanted to tell him not to be ignored, but at that very moment a projectile hit the hilt of his sword. The sword was torn from his hands and fell onto the stone floor slabs. "Damn!" Maximus said, looking angrily into Kaizef's eyes. Maximus ran up to him and grabbed his opponent by the collar. He threw him to the floor and began to hit him with his fists. "Kaizef!" Luciel screamed, very scared for him. Maximus shouted that he would finish off Kaizef. Luciel thought that this fight needed to be intervened in. She again recalled the terrible pictures of her previous life. Maximus called Kaizef a demonic spawn. "Here you go!" shouted Maximus. He continued to strike his already fallen opponent. No, Luciel thought, trying hard to fight the numbness that came over her in situations like this. She stubbornly told herself to move. After all, despite all the fear she felt, she had to stop this fight. Maximus called Kaizef an impudent scum. Luciel's eyes flashed with the rage she was beginning to feel. "Kaizef!" she exclaimed, and also created a magical flow consisting of small clots of mana. This extraordinary power made Maximus recoil. He couldn't understand what kind of strange energy was attacking him. Kaizef rose from the floor and tried to control the shining magical clots. This force lifted Maximus high above the ground. Kaizef managed to intercept control of this magic. He managed to keep the enemy in the air. The streams of energy seemed to surround Maximus in a sphere from which he could not escape. With a movement of his hand, Kaizef made him fall to the floor. "Maximus!" shouted the schoolboy's companions. Kaizef looked at them with an excited face. They were scared by how cunningly this guy used magic. Kaizef asked if they wanted to end up like their leader. Having made their decision, they rushed to run away, cursing everything and sending everything to hell. Kaizef closed his eyes tiredly for a moment. "You're okay," he heard before opening them again. Luciel stood over him, worried. She extended her hand to him to help him up. Kaizef asked if the drops of mana he saw were Luciel's doing. He admitted that they helped him a lot because otherwise he would not have been able to win the fight. Luciel smiled widely and said that she was very glad that she could help. Kaizef looked at her again carefully. He stood up and cast a worried glance at the place where Maximus had been thrown. Kaizef told Luciel that he would quickly finish this unpleasant matter and return. Then he walked up to Maximus, who was still lying on the floor. Kaizef's eyes glowed bright red, giving the boy a rather sinister appearance. Luciel noticed the expression on his face as Kaizef looked at Maximus. Luciel called his name and took his hand. "Everything is fine," said the girl. "Now he won't do anything to anyone anymore." Kaizef looked at the girl who had resolutely stood on the same side with him. She was absolutely right. Now they could go back. At this time, Duke Belstein was told that young Master Kaizef was such an outstanding student that he had already mastered all the academic subjects, especially dark magic and swordsmanship, and the academy representatives were not pleased to admit that they had nothing more to teach him. Louis Vuitton asked if there was really nothing left, other than that he wanted to know how things were going with his social interactions. Teacher Kaizefa was not able to answer this question right away. Usually, this student was on his own, and it was not a pleasant thing for Louis Vuitton to learn about it. It didn't matter how closed off the Belsteins lived. In the end, all people sooner or later overstepped their own boundaries, creating connections with other people. The Duke once thought that it would be better for Kaizef to interact with someone other than his family, which is why he sent his son to the academy. Little Kaizef cried bitterly, clung to his father, and did not want to leave his home. To think that all this had been done and experienced in vain was incredibly sad for the Duke. Hurried footsteps were heard at the threshold. While Louis Vuitton was thinking, visitors came to the office. It was Kaizef and Luciel. They appeared holding hands. The Duke asked if the two had found common ground while communicating without his presence. After all, it seems they had become a little closer while he was away. Kaizef said that everything is not as it seems from the outside. He is just worried about the girl, because she is still very young. Louis Vuitton said that Luciel was small and charming. Kaizef told his father that he didn't mean that. The Duke wanted to know from his son how he was getting on at the academy. Kaizef was surprised by this sudden question. He replied that everything was fine. The father looked at the boy carefully. It was impossible to tell whether he was telling the truth. Louis Vuitton said that if Kaizef thinks that the level here is not suitable for him, then he should not adjust to it. Kaizef suspected that the professor had told his father something about him, but he didn't want anyone to know about his problems, so he continued to insist that it was, in fact, very interesting here. "That's how it is," Louis Vuitton said curiously, and then reminded Luciel that it was time for them to return home. Luciel said that was true. She was wondering if she should tell him about the engagement first, since Kaizef didn't seem to be going to say anything. The girl turned to Louis Vuitton and said that she still needed to explain about the engagement, but the Duke interrupted her. He had been thinking about all this for a long time. Instead of a daughter-in-law, Luciel could easily have become his daughter, he said simply. This idea amazed both children. Luciel couldn't believe that the Duke had asked her to become his daughter. In that case, the girl won't have to leave Belstein either. "Father," said Kaizef. "Your Highness," said Luciel. The girl laughed. She assumed that the Duke was joking, but she was still pleased to hear it. Louis Vuitton said he wasn't joking. Kaizef had made it clear he didn't want to get married, so it was better for them to be brother and sister to each other. Kaizef objected that they had decided to get married after all. Luciel explained to the surprised Duke that they would marry and divorce after she came of age. Louis Vuitton asked why his son had changed his mind so suddenly and abruptly. Kaizef explained that he decided it was necessary to protect the young lady. Luciel looked at him with wide eyes. The Duke replied that it was fine. He understood everything. He was a little sorry, but still this marriage would only be valid until the girl came of age. A contract appeared in front of Kaizef, which the boy had to sign. Since Luciel was not even 10 years old yet, it was necessary to begin with a long engagement. They signed a preliminary agreement on magic paper. The Duke carefully studied everything written. He was thinking of holding the wedding on Luciel's upcoming 10th birthday. He asked when that birthday would be. Luciel replied that her birthday is in June, but she couldn't remember the number, but it seemed to be somewhere at the beginning. Both Belsteins were quite puzzled by the fact that one could not know one's date of birth. Louis Vuitton announced that Luciel's birthday will now be June 1st, so the wedding date will also be that day. "Okay," Luciel said with joyful relief. The Duke reminded them once again that it was time for them to return home to the estate. Kaizef asked his father to be careful. Louis Vuitton replied that he would be in touch. Luciel looked back at Kaizef with alarm as she walked out of the office hand in hand with the Duke. She told Kaizef to take care of himself too. Kaizef saw her waving goodbye to him. He looked after them for a long time, standing on the threshold. The Duke led the girl out of the academy by the hand. They walked along a brightly lit gallery, flooded with slanting rays of sunlight. Luciel thought that the atmosphere in the academy was not pleasant. She didn't know if everything would be okay with Kaizef. This worried her a lot. On the one hand, she promised not to bother him unnecessarily. On the other hand, she might have wanted to help him. An unexpected thought came to her mind. She decided to turn to the Duke. She wanted to ask him to buy her something. Luciel looked at the fountain where the local birds were drinking and thought about the carrier birds. So they went to the right store. The Duke said that the girl could choose whatever she liked, and Luciel began to look around this unusual place with enthusiasm. The merchant greeted her and extended his hand to her, on which sat a bird. Other birds were on his shoulders and not even his hat. He asked if the young lady needed a messenger bird. This little one, the trader said, would do just fine. The species was called the Solbang owl. Luciel picked up the bird. It was so cute, and with a messenger bird you can send messages without revealing your identity. She could, for example, become a secret pen pal for Kaizef. The merchant remarked that the young lady seemed to like the bird, and Luciel happily agreed, for the bird was absolutely charming. Louis Vuitton said it was funny that the girl chose a pet that looked so much like her. The merchant handed Luciel a whistle. He said that the whistle made a sound that this little one liked. The merchant said that the owl would be imprinted with a coat of arms and sent to the Belstein estate. Luciel thanked him. Everything you need will be loaded directly into the carriage. Louis Vuitton and Luciel also walked in and got into the carriage. The Duke said that the messenger bird was inconvenient. He suggested ordering a communication device. Luciel first asked him again what he had said, and then said that it was not worth it. She remembered that these devices cost as much as a whole ship, so she said that a bird would be enough. She thought that she would need to send letters to Kaizef more often. She will try to support him in this academy, and then the boy will no longer feel lonely and abandoned. At this time, Gilliard was sitting by the fireplace in the Belstein estate. He was also very lonely, and the reason for this was too obvious. He had only been without Luciel for a day, but he already felt completely empty. Gilliard thought about Kaizef, about how he was living there at the academy. Over the past few years, he had become very gloomy. He and Gilliard had become very distant. Chess games and training were now nothing more than distant memories. Gilliard thought with regret that Léonie was still too young for such a pastime. It was impossible to spend time quietly with Léonie. He was not interested in listening to books. He especially did not like sad ones and generally preferred noisy, active games. Gilliard thought about Ruvid's cold detachment and Léonie's stubbornness. All these qualities noticeably diminished with the appearance of Luciel. One could say that the very atmosphere in the estate changed. The girl was so kind and spontaneous, she addressed him so joyfully, called him grandfather. Her influence was felt in everything. Gilliard thought about the white room with portraits hanging on the wall. He approached the woman lying there and told her to wake up, for she would adore Luciel more than anyone else. "Is it true?" he asked, covering her hand with his sleeping palm. This dark-haired woman's name was Evelyn. Gilliard held her hand, but she was fast asleep. That night at the academy, Kaizef heard strange voices repeating his name, like ghosts, more like zombies creeping up to his bed. Kaizef lay on the bed, curled up in a ball under the blanket and covering his ears with his hands. He said that he couldn't hear them. He begged and demanded that they not call him anymore. "Young master," said the woman who came very close to the bed. She asked what was wrong. This voice was so familiar it called and tormented Kaizef. It was his nanny, and the boy stuck his head out from under the blanket. He looked at what was happening with horror. "Young master," repeated the nanny, and those who stood behind her, their bodies covered with ugly scars. Kaizef was scared, but he couldn't stop looking at them. The ghost's hand touched the boy's bed. Kaizef screamed, but a hand grabbed the blanket to shake the boy out of it. The nanny continued to reach for him, although the boy had already fallen out of bed. He found himself on the carpet when he suddenly heard a familiar chuckle. "You want to make a contract with me?" the voice from the black smoke asked. "Ah!" exclaimed Kaizef, covering his mouth with his hand. The voice said that then he would never see these ghosts again. Kaizef cringed. He screamed no. He covered his face with his hands. He didn't want any of this. The darkness reached out to him, taking shape. It had ugly paws with terrible claws. Kaizef, the darkness repeated, called him. The voice asked if he wanted to show him something funny. A spiral of light wove itself into the dark room. Kaizef took his hands away from his face and looked at him with an unhappy expression. The voice said that the boy would need his strength. Kaizef stood up and sat on the bed, deep in thought. This day turned out to be very full of impressions. Kaizef thought about the engagement that he had concluded so unexpectedly for himself. The voice asked him why he was worrying again about something that was completely unsuitable for him. Kaizef said his personal ghost finally showing his face. Kaizef closed his eyes, pretending to be asleep, very tired. The ghost hovered above him, peering into his face. Kaizef finally opened his eye and looked straight at him. Ever since he made a pact with this guy, he thought he shouldn't love anyone or get married. The ghost boy took a closer look at Kaizef. He asked what that smell of fresh magic was. He wanted to know who Kaizef had met. He answered that he had met his father. The ghost began to fly around to disturb Kaizef. He assured that it was a lie, that this was the first time he had ever sensed such pure and fresh magical energy. He wanted to know who Kaizef had met. He told Kaizef not to try to deceive him because he was 100 years older. Kaizef replied that his interlocutor should stop annoying him and go do his job as a reaper, but he complained that he had been doing it all day anyway. He said it was boring and he didn't want to do it. The ghost melted away into black smoke again and Kaizef continued to lie on the bed. He looked straight ahead with a fixed gaze. The horses of the army gathered for battle were already fully prepared. In his imagination, the crown prince, with a drawn sword in his hand, was rushing into battle at the head of an army. Everything was supposed to disappear in a monstrous fire. The crown prince will stand before the defeated Louis Vuitton. He will stand with a blood-stained sword over the body of Gilliard. All Kaizef could do was cover his eyes with his hands, driving away the obsessive visions of a terrible future. Yes, nothing will change from the fact that now they were engaged to this girl. Even after marriage and until the end of the contract, they remain strangers, but he was obliged to protect Belstein. Kaizef curled up on the bed and thought that he would do it even if he had to become a reaper. The next day, a completely different scene took place at the Orbia estate, darling. "Long time no see," exclaimed the smiling girl in the hat. She asked Count Orbia, who was sleeping on a chair with a bottle in his arms, if he had received the letter. The envelope had the Belstein coat of arms on it, and the room was filled with the unbearable smell of alcohol. The phrase about the Belsteins awakened the sleeping man, causing him to almost jump up in place. "Oh my God," the lady said as Orbia snatched the letter from her. Duke Belstein reported that if he did not receive a signature on the document approving the marriage of Luciel and his son within 3 days, he would take his own measures. All the mercenaries were gone, so now all that was left was to wait for Luciel to come out herself. "Where should I look for her?" Count Orbia shouted in anger. The girl said that she had even heard about this. Duke Belstein brought a young girl to a capital clothing store, claiming that she was his daughter-in-law. She suggested that it might be the missing Luciel. Orbia thought that with the help of the store, it would be possible to establish contact. The thought made him grin with sinister anticipation. Orbia laughed, throwing his head back, and the girl looked at him with some confusion about what made him so happy. Orbia declared that Luciel would not go anywhere from him now. At this time, Luciel was sleeping in her bed, and her sleep was somewhat restless. This day was too full of impressions. In her sleep, Luciel's face looked very defenseless and tender.